Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell. I'm a doula in Washoe County, Nevada, a Medicaid provider, a lactation educator, childbirth educator, and mom of 18. You can find me and connect on doulainreno.com. Remember, give a shout out to those who are brave enough to share their stories with us on how they have become parents. Let's dive in. Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell. Today I'm on with Marissa Zwetow. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
We've had to schedule this a million times, but we finally got here. And I am really excited about what we're going to talk about. I think there's this huge, massive list of conversations women don't have with each other, and this is definitely a big one. I want you to jump in and share your parenting journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I became a mother a bit later in life, and I think that might be relevant because I can see how maybe past successes or a sense of achievement kind of worked against me. I was 36, and pregnancy was pretty uneventful. I was looking forward, it was planned. Um, and I couldn't have predicted what would come, what having a baby would look like. So it really started with the birth experience itself, where it kind of hit me hard in the face that I can't control this. And I see this so much with my clients. So I guess I'll just interject that I was already a licensed mental health therapist at the time that I became a mom, and through the experience that I had, I started specializing in it. So what I do see with my clients is that they wanted a natural birth. They had the birth plan, they did the classes, and it didn't go as they hoped or thought. And that really can be the beginning point for a lot of women of just despair and sadness and disappointment. And I think kind of the messaging around that is, oh, you should be grateful. You had a healthy baby or whatever it is. Yeah,
Healthy
right.
mom, healthy baby. I mean, to be honest, as a doula, like, you do want a healthy mom and a healthy baby, but that shouldn't be where we set the bar. So keep going. That should not be the
Yeah,
bar, though.
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I think it's a yes and,
Yes,
right?
and yes.
Yeah, of course. I could have been worse, or I'm grateful. And man, I wanted this birth experience, and I didn't get it. I felt like everything I had wanted on my birth plan just got crossed off. Just every hour it was like something else got crossed off. Even to the point where towards the end, I had wanted to allow the umbilical cord to, I'd heard, right, let it pulsate for a
Right.
good minute. Nope, couldn't even do that because it was wrapped around her neck. So of course that, I want the intervention, but it was just this sense of like defeat, like, oh, okay. And yes, my daughter was healthy, and so was I. But I didn't get a chance to process that birth experience, which I see happen so often, right? You're home, and now you're on to the next hurdle. Um, for me, it was breastfeeding. So I didn't, what I know now is like, I should have had, I should have had a therapist just lined up, which we don't really see that
No,
unless.
I do, but
Do you?
yeah,
Okay, good,
I
good,
do.
good.
Mhm.
Good for
I
you.
think mental health and PMADs, like specifically postpartum, even if it's just anxiety, I've never done this before and I don't know what I'm doing and I don't want to feel like I don't know what I'm doing, because every
Yeah,
mom doesn't want to screw up their kids. Like, even if it's something pretty low key that's
yeah.
beyond a newborn safety class, right? But
Yes.
or if anyone's had a history of anxiety, depression, anything like that, I
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
strongly encourage my clients to have someone lined up, because it can take 3 months to get an appointment. And then
Yeah.
in the event that medication's needed, it takes another month for that to kick in. So now you've gone a
Yeah.
minimum of 4 months
Yeah.
with no help.
Yeah.
So yes, but keep going. I
Yeah.
think everyone,
I
yeah.
should have, clearly I should have hired you. What I didn't have a history though. And I will say, I see that a lot too, that me and other women are blindsided, just absolutely blindsided by what
Yes.
the experience ends up being. So in hindsight, I wish I had a therapist lined up that I could have just swooped in and shared my birth story to
Yeah.
start there. Um, so for me, I had ideals, as I think we're all going to have kind of these ideals around what the postpartum and transition into motherhood experience will look like. You know, breastfeeding. Of course, I'm going to breastfeed. It's going to be natural and soothing and wonderful, right? Yeah, I see you shaking your head. Yeah.
Yes. I always say babies come with a strong desire and zero skill.
Yeah.
And we also have a strong desire. And it's not zero skill, it's just that we've never done it before. And anyone who's driven an automatic and learned to drive a stick shift, that's what
Yeah.
breastfeeding is like. You feel
Oh
like you need,
gosh.
there's too many things happening for two hands. So,
Yeah.
yes, it is natural, quote, it is. And
Yeah.
you can have a strong desire, but it's not, it's hard. Postpartum's hard.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And even if we make that comparison to learning a manual, um, even then, you know, the car, I don't know. I don't know
You know,
that I can make that
we
analogy
can
work,
skip
but
that one, but
no,
yeah.
no, I love that analogy. I really do. And maybe there's some more analogies to throw in there too, that if the car doesn't have enough gas, it doesn't matter if you know how
Uh,
to do the manual. So I didn't produce enough milk is what I'm getting
okay, okay, okay.
at. Right? So yeah, I completely agree with you. There were so many learning curves, so many. Oh my gosh, so many. I found myself just completely overwhelmed. And I will also throw into I didn't bond with my daughter, which I know is common. I didn't know that then, but I know now. And I've researched and there really is no clear answer that satisfies me. You know,
Yep.
sometimes they want to link it to the epidural or this or that. I have a suspicion that cortisol kind of hijacked my system and
Okay.
oxytocin maybe went down. I don't know though. How could I know for sure? But I didn't bond with her. And I think that's so relevant because, you know, these sayings that we have, you know, the hardest job you'll ever love, hard, yes, love, no. And I didn't have that. And that was hard. I imagine that you have a really strong bond, you can kind of muddle through the hard part, but when you don't even have that bond, I found myself very early on in what have I done? What
Yeah.
have I done? And why do people do this? I don't get it.
No
It was
take backs.
awful. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Um,
think that's really important. Even if you do bond, you don't love it, how hard it is. And,
yeah, yeah,
I hate when people are dismissive, like, oh, you better enjoy this newborn stage because
oh
wait until they
God.
get right. Because that newborn stage is the hardest thing you've ever experienced with that child as a parent,
Yeah.
even if it's a subsequent baby and different personalities. I, I hate how we belittle how
Hmm.
challenging that moment is. And
Yeah.
when they say, well, the days are long, but the years are short, so enjoy it. Well, yeah, most of my kids are adults. I don't know how I gave birth 32 years ago. But that doesn't minimize how long those freaking days are.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you're right. I mean, there's so many pieces to this. And I have information also for my clients when you don't bond, when that doesn't hit
Yeah.
you immediately, like this
Yeah.
glowing,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know, it's skipping in rainbows and
Yeah.
oxytocin, and it's not always, it doesn't feel that way. Also, can you talk about, because as a therapist,
Hmm.
working in postpartum, I would think there's a difference between just you were talking about how your birth plan you had to keep letting things go, which happens a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
And there's that being really pissed or bummed about the expectations versus reality. And then there's birth trauma.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know where one ends and the other begins or if they're kind of the same thing, but I see a lot of birth trauma.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really is subjective. If if I say it was traumatic, it's traumatic. That,
Okay. Yeah.
that was my experience of it. Um, I think um, I think birth trauma has a lot to do with it's not even so much what's happening as how the person is feeling, probably feeling unsupported, unseen. I hear a lot,
Okay.
left alone almost. There's so much attention, of course, on the safety of the baby. Sometimes there's just a lack of communication or rapport, even with the provider. Um, yeah, yeah, there's a lot to say there, but absolutely, and again, it it's we need more time and attention around the birth experience. I
Yeah.
think it should, we have the 6 week OBGYN appointment. There should just be, I think OBGYNs need to get better about mental health. Um, my dream and vision is that there's these centers and kind of like a one stop. And in addition to the OBGYN, there's lactation,
Mm.
mental health groups. And I think it should not, I don't say mandatory, even nothing's mandatory, but like it should be standard of care that you
Yes.
meet with a therapist.
I
Or,
agree.
we don't even have to call it a therapist. It could just be a mental health wellness mentor, you know, um, which the thing too is the the headline of what I do is that I am trying to kind of take apart these mental health diagnoses, particularly postpartum depression.
Okay.
I think they are real, but for me, um, what I see so clearly now is that the transition into motherhood was so hard that it actually caused depression, but we don't hear it talked like that. What we hear
Yeah.
currently is, oh, you must have postpartum depression. You didn't bond with your baby. You're sad, you're crying, you're in despair. And for me, it felt so invalidating. It was like, oh, I have this mental illness that I need to come to terms with. Versus what I'm saying now is someone would kind of look at all the things that happened and say, oh my gosh, no wonder you're
Yeah.
depressed.
Right.
And that would have been validating. And actually, I think had I had the right support, the right validation, the right education, I probably could have gotten ahead of it and actually not developed depression. And that's the difference between like this onset of a mental illness versus looking at everything that's happening and saying, oh, if you don't get ahead of this, this could turn into depression. It's just a different way of looking at it
Mhm.
that I never heard talked about. Like I remember reading about postpartum depression, some books and articles, and I kept looking for the chapter that said, and by the way, motherhood is really hard, but I never found that chapter. I'm serious. And that led to me writing my book. I needed more than a chapter. I did a whole book on motherhood is hard and let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, and that's true because, back when I started having kids, we didn't have internet 32 years ago. So
Yeah.
there was like the library and support groups, which was that I think actually was probably a better climate than
Yeah.
social media, this gentle parenting and doesn't everything look great. And I mean, I remember when one of my daughters was like, have you looked at gentle parenting? And I'm like, it's a load of crap that's going to make you feel like a worse parent. That's
Oh
like,
no.
but it's a
Yeah.
different generation, right?
Yeah.
And I just think we're so inundated with
Oh,
information. When
geez.
I have clients that are like, so I was watching TikTok, I'm like, let me stop you right there and tell you, stop watching TikTok to
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
information and advice on pregnancy, childbirth, and parenting.
Yeah.
Just don't do it.
Yeah.
Um, because there's so much misinformation and there's so much self-esteem and belittling and berating, and that's not the place that you should be getting your cup filled at
Thank
all.
you. Yeah.
Tell me about, because you were a therapist and then you went through this and it was obviously not what you expected because it's, again, people don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, when and how did you
Yeah.
realize that you needed help outside? And how did you navigate that yourself?
Yeah. That's a great question. I kept hoping it would get better. And I see that a lot too, which I get that. I mean, um, I think there are narratives that kind of say the baby blues, for example, we know about that. So I really just thought, oh, this is temporary. This will get better. And it didn't, it just got worse.
Okay.
Um, and, and I wish I had gotten the right validation. I just, I feel bad as a clinician that I am kind of rocking the boat a bit with the diagnosis of postpartum depression. I don't want to take away, but I do want to add to the conversation and just kind of clarify that not everyone has this onset of mental illness. We need to talk about how having a baby can cause depression, but that's taboo, right?
Yeah.
Like we're literally comparing it to like a death or a divorce. And I am here to say absolutely. Sometimes, right? Like
Yeah.
if everything goes wrong, um, oh, I think you had said that there was like 20 side effects, right?
Oh,
Or
yes. Yes.
yes,
I always, so I was going to bring this up. I tell my
yeah,
clients, it doesn't matter if it's pregnancy, labor and delivery, or postpartum.
yeah,
If there are 20 side effects and you're going
yes,
to get seven, but I
yeah,
don't know which seven, I'm not
yes,
going to talk to you about all 20 because that's so overwhelming.
yes,
And you'll be watching for them and looking for them. And what if I get this? And
yeah,
like, we have to kind of wait to see which 7%. And those are arbitrary numbers, obviously. But
yeah,
I mean, I've had clients that I had a client that had the most beautiful, like I could not plan out a more idyllic home birth, 8 hours, the support, the environment. And when I came to postpartum and I said at the 2 week point, 3 days is like, we're putting out fires and figuring out
yeah,
breastfeeding.
yeah.
And,
Oh
but
gosh,
at
yeah.
2 weeks, I sit down and say, let's talk about your birth story. And she said,
Oh,
it was traumatic for me. And
yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
how, in what way? Because it went
yeah,
faster. She expected 24
yeah,
hours and it went
yeah,
faster.
yeah,
And that trauma for her was real. But her
yeah,
talking through it, she realized. And it's one of those things like sometimes what sticks with someone comes so far to left field in my perception,
oh, yeah,
but
yeah,
it's their seven things out of 20 that hit
absolutely,
them and blindside
yeah,
them. And I can tell you that almost 100% of women, even though I tell them, at day two, the baby's in a cluster feed. You're going to realize like every muscle in your body hurts. You pulled a muscle in your armpit. You didn't even know you had one there. So you're
yeah,
sore. Your
yeah,
baby's nursing constantly. You're going to doubt if you have enough milk. You do. It's normal. And I'm going to see you at day three. Your boobs are going to be out to here and you're
yeah,
going to be exhausted and sore.
yeah,
And they're like, okay. And then I get there and they're like, yeah, but
yeah,
holy cow. And I'm like, well, it's
yeah,
kind of like telling someone who's never had salt what salt tastes like.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can't
yeah,
really,
yeah,
because until they taste it, they don't get it. And
yeah,
so for moms, it's the same way. Until we're there, we're not there. I
yeah,
don't know
yeah,
what's,
yeah, yeah. But at least you're planting seeds. I
yeah,
give you so much credit for the work that you're doing. It's so important. And
you too.
oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah,
I know before I forget, do you do virtual outside of the state you live in?
I do. Yes,
Okay.
I
So
do.
I
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
will tab that, but I
yeah,
absolutely don't want to forget. So how did you recognize what helped you? How did you get the help?
yeah,
What was
yeah.
your process?
Yeah, so the initial process was learning everything I could about postpartum depression. And I'll say this, it helped, but something was still always missing for me. Like I said, I kept seeking this validation that really that's all we got. This is a mental illness. And I know it's there, I know mental illness, there's a stigma, and it's not that. It really isn't. It is a true validation and clarity on, oh my gosh, what you went through sounds incredibly hard.
Mhm.
And it makes sense that you would then develop depression. So what ended up happening is I'll never forget one training where a maternal mental health professional was leading the training. And she was going over the causes, which I had heard over and over again, right? The causes for postpartum depression. Like you said, a history maybe of depression or anxiety,
Mhm.
um, lack of support, maybe, all the things that are happening, changes in your body, lack of sleep, so on and so forth. And I still don't hear kind of what I'm looking for. So I raise my hand and I say, well, what about a mom who's really struggling to enjoy the role, motherhood. And she said to me, that sounds pathological. Like, and then she
What?
added, yeah. And then she added on to, like, when I hear a woman say she doesn't want to be a mother, it sounds unnatural. I think everyone in the training gasped. So I actually am grateful that her comment was so asinine because it really made me stop. It really made me think like, oh my gosh, like, this is crazy. This is what this professional thinks. And I realize we're missing a storyline here. So what helped me heal is I started researching on my own. I started putting
Mhm.
inquiries out on social media, hoping to hear other moms say similar things to me, and they did. Women were saying, I thought I would love being a mother, but I realized I don't. Or another mom said, I confessed to my husband one night that I felt like we had ruined our lives. And
Ah,
I kept getting all this validation, like, oh my gosh, there's a whole slew of us that really struggled with this transition into motherhood. And it's not just about mental illness, it's about the hardships. And so that led me on that was the most healing when I started researching and gathering
yep.
stories and data. And then I realized there's got to be a book out there that talks about this. And so the title is my brand, Postpartum Happiness, and the subtitle is What to Do When You Love the Kids But Hate the Job. And I get really candid and honest. I share anonymous mom quotes. I share it's a really short book too. It's like you could read it in like an hour. It's really short on purpose, right, for new moms.
It's in my
And
Amazon cart right now.
cool. And I think I just have three sections. The first section is the job sucks. And I just say it. Not for everyone. I'm not saying it as fact, but for me and for a lot of us, it did and it does. And let's talk about it. Not because I want to get stuck in misery and regret, but because for me, it was about removing the shame and the guilt and that question of what's wrong with me. And even getting that mental health diagnosis, you would think that's relief, like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. I just have a mental illness. And
Oh
I
my
feel
God.
bad. I don't mean to, I'm not trying to add to stigma. I'm really not. I just know that in the realm of postpartum, yes, sometimes it is mental illness, hands down, psychosis, anxiety, even bipolar. I get that. And sometimes the transition is so hard, it causes depression, and we need to start talking about it like that.
Right.
And we can get ahead of it too.
Which that's my goal with anyone who might feel like they need mental health support. And I don't want to say, I mean, I think everybody could, like you said, at least a screening or a wellness evaluation, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah,
And, I interviewed a pediatrician who was a pediatrician before having a child. And
yeah.
she said, I used to think, like, why are these parents asking me all these questions?
Oh no.
And then she gave birth and was like, holy crap, now I know,
Yeah,
because they're not seeing an OB for 6 weeks. And that's like a 10-minute check.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
nobody for them to go to. They're at the
yeah,
pediatricians on all these visits in that first 6 weeks.
yeah,
They're not talking to anyone else. If they don't have a
yeah,
doula, if they don't have referrals, if they don't, you don't even know what question to ask and who to ask it to. So I believe that also. And I try to really encourage it, but it's not like, it's not a system that's easily set up to do a 30-minute wellness evaluation
yeah,
to see, like, what, this is what I recommend. I feel like you've got things, because some people are good.
yeah,
Also, I feel like, again, in my generation, depression was something that you had, that you
yeah.
could get through. Now it
Oh,
seems like something that you are.
yeah. That's interesting.
And that's a very different mindset. If I have depression, like I have a cold,
Yeah,
and I can work through it, and there's a reason why, and it can be like we can figure it out, as
yeah.
opposed to, um, you know, it's who we are. That's something that you'll never get over.
Ooh, yeah.
And
Uh,
I don't know how much, I think some of the stigmas behind mental health, we don't talk about it enough. We don't have it broken down into enough categories, and we take it on as part of who we are instead of just something that we have that we can.
yeah, yeah.
deal
Yeah.
with. But I don't know if that's the right way to say all of that.
Well, I guess I think it's both. Um, I think that given my genetic makeup, I might have a predisposition for it. That, with depression, it's not like you can really draw blood and count neurotransmitters. It doesn't quite work like that. I know
Yeah.
they can do brain scans and things like that, but um, I think that I do believe genetics plays a part, and that can be a bummer. Like what do I do with that? Um, but I also think we can work through it. And everyone might have a completely different baseline than someone else.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And I think too, my genetic makeup plays a part in how I regard motherhood and postpartum too. Feeling like something's wrong with me. I felt like I've heard this from other moms too. Like, gosh, did I not get the mom gene? Which, implies that there's this natural. Well, that's probably what this clinician thought when she said sounded pathological. She obviously had this regard that all women have this inkling to be a mom, which I don't think is true at all.
You talk about on your website, you talk about the gap between what you'd hoped for
Yeah.
and what the current reality is, which I think
Oh
for
gosh.
almost every mom, there is some amount of gap just because
Yeah.
your body went through so much
Yeah.
being pregnant and having a baby and then adjusting to postpartum, like how that's it's like never skipping in rainbows, there's always
Yeah.
that gap,
Yeah.
and that you can feel like yourself again, which is interesting because menopause was the worst for me, and we
Oh
don't talk
God.
about that either, but just
No.
where
Yeah.
like there's this gap of how
Yeah.
you thought it was going to be and feeling defeated or confused, or like the guilt that you must have had to feel like you didn't get the
Oh,
mom gene,
yeah.
right? Like, what is wrong
Tremendous.
with you? I
Yeah.
can't even imagine. And I love that you talk about it though, and that your research and really talking to other women who were willing to open up and quote
Yeah.
how they felt,
Yeah.
because in we're in a society where you'd be completely berated for being
Yeah.
honest about how you feel, which is makes that gap and those feelings worse.
Yeah.
Did you have other kids after the first one?
No.
One and done.
One and done.
I wasn't sure. You were like, that's enough. I've had enough.
Yeah.
Um, I want to jump into your business because, like you said, you were already
Yeah.
a mental health, you were already a therapist.
Yeah. Yeah.
You went through this, you went through training, and I've been on with like OBs and all kinds of medical professionals who have said things where, just like that woman said in yours,
Yeah.
where it's
Yeah.
pathological, where I'm like, how do you ever get patients? I'm like, how are you in
I
business?
know. Yeah.
So there's that side of it. But tell me about the transition to your business through
Yeah.
your process
Yeah.
and what you do now.
Yeah. So when I went through it started to feel very sacred. Like it became very clear that it any therapist would not be able to help, like just going to any therapist. Um, and I did go to a therapist who I think was well intentioned. You could just tell I was desperate for someone to share kind of their story. And I just realized I realized this it is a specialty and it needs to be a specialty. And that's when I realized I wanted to specialize in it. And initially I was open to kind of all postpartum, whereas now I'm more narrowing and niching down to um, the struggle that I went through, that particular transition um, around motherhood, and just how challenging it is. And it's interesting you brought up menopause. I feel there is more of a movement now, I think,
Mhm.
and fighting for research, fighting for grants and government funding, and I think women are just fed up with,
Mhm.
that their doctors don't even know how to read hormonal tests, right? Like so on and so forth. And
Right.
and I'm kind of doing the same thing with postpartum, that we need to start talking about it more, start sharing stories, start normalizing that the transition can be really hard, and that will hopefully lead to more moms like you're doing it too. I love what you're doing. Like there's a possibility of 20 things going right or going wrong, and the odds of all of them going right are probably not going to happen.
Your odds are not in your favor.
Yeah, and I feel like I love that analogy. I would say 15 didn't go right for me. I
Mm.
haven't counted, but probably it was just I had just had a very long list, and I wish I'd had more education or information around it, even if it is just planting a seed. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Some of it probably would have went over my head, but it would have planted a seed, and at least I would have known, like, oh, okay, my doula mentioned this or my OB mentioned this. It that seed at least allows me then to do a next step. I didn't even have a next step.
Yeah.
Um, I'll just say too, I think the questionnaire sucks. The medical questionnaire, it is not a relatable questionnaire, in my opinion. I think we can do better than that.
You're talking about for depression and
Yes,
yeah.
the
Yeah, I had them printed off that I would go to all of my postpartum visits and I never like had somebody fill it out or
yeah,
but it was just not the right information or approach to check
yeah,
boxes to see.
yeah. At
Um,
least you're there doing it in person, though.
mm,
Most of the time, you're just handed a clipboard,
oh, at 6 weeks
right? Yeah,
with
and
no follow
yeah,
up.
yeah,
I think that's something that doulas have really like, because I was in birth work for 12 years and took a break and coming back to it now is a different environment. And my resource library is probably the thing that I am most proud of and that I use the most. Community resources, connections. It's one of the reasons that I asked you, can you do telehealth
yeah,
outside of your
yeah,
state? Because I want you on my website and I
yeah,
want your information to be able to give to my clients. Um, I think doulas are that were there physically in person after the birth a couple times in that first couple weeks, asking those questions, getting
yeah,
to know our clients, kind of looking for warning signs and bringing up referrals if needed. And if you
yeah,
don't have someone to connect you, again, you don't even know what the next steps are. You don't know what
yeah,
questions to ask. You
yeah,
don't know that anything isn't perfectly right. Like
yeah,
you don't know if is this the way it's supposed to be? Does every
yeah,
woman feel this way?
yeah,
You
exactly.
don't know that.
Yeah,
So I think definitely lack of support. And women are 50% of the population ish,
yeah.
and we have a lot less money into research
Oh
in
God.
general. A lot less education. It took me 3 years to find a provider who understood how to
Oh
read a
my
hormone panel.
God. Oh God.
I mean, we should never be having these problems. So from
Wow.
getting your period all the
Yeah,
way, like starting your hormones when you get your period through
yeah,
infertility and pregnancy and postpartum, all the way through to menopause, from beginning
yeah,
to end, there's no support, there's no research, there's no training, there's not
yeah,
really much support. So I think women are in this position where they're in these super hard transitions of their lives
yeah,
and there's nobody seems to know anything. And that's
yeah,
so I'm so grateful for you
yeah,
capturing postpartum because it's so hard and we don't know it's hard until we're there.
yeah,
And then we're there. And
yeah,
and then what do we do?
yeah, absolutely.
What's the best way for people to get in touch with you? What kind of take me through your process if I'm a client and I contact
Yeah.
you? Take me through your process a little bit.
Yeah, so everything links back to postpartum happiness. That's been my brand. So my website, postpartumhappiness.com, all of social media at postpartum happiness. Except for X, it was too long, so I went with postpartum happy.
You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. I text my phone number's on the website. Just send me a text. Let's just make it as easy as possible. But there's a lot of information on my website as
Yes.
well, just to even help validate a new mom that isn't even sure. That often gets asked too, is do I have postpartum depression? And I always just say it doesn't. It, the starting point, it doesn't matter if you feel like you need support. You need support. That's it, right? Um, we can talk more about that, but that gets asked a lot. Like you're saying, is this normal? But it doesn't. Normal gets confusing, right? Common, but not normal. The point is that we want women to get support and get help and know there's solutions.
Yeah, and I'm adding your phone number and email to the show notes so that
Yeah.
people can really easily find that. But your website is super comprehensive. We have all the links to all your social media.
Okay.
And you're in California.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like right over the hill from me.
Uh,
But I want people to know that they are not alone,
yeah.
that it's not abnormal to
Yeah.
feel how they're feeling, and that there
Yeah.
is something that they can do.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's kind of twofold. One is it's hard and we can talk about it and you can feel validated and it can be normalized. And then part two is what do we do now? I tend
Yeah.
to be very solution focused. Like, yes,
Yeah.
I get why you're feeling this way. It's okay. And we're not going to leave you stuck. We're going to figure out what kind of help you need. I should have hired a nanny. I absolutely should
Oh,
have. Yeah. Because there was too many things going wrong. And the fact that I wasn't even bonded with her, um, I should have gotten help. Well, I'm just in the trenches doing something every day. So yeah, I tend to be very solution focused, looking at what's on their plate, what we can take off their plate. Um, yeah, we don't want to get stuck in regret. I'm heavy to validate that because again, I want to remove shame and guilt, but we don't want to get stuck there. We want to move past it.
exactly. Thank you so much for being on, Marissa. I've loved this conversation. We'll definitely have to stay in touch. I need to get all your information on my
Yes,
website, get
thank you
people
so
help.
much.